The air in the great hall was thick with the scent of roasted meat and spilled wine, yet beneath it lingered the bitter odor of defeat. Tapestries torn in the recent siege had been hastily mended. Bactrian nobles sat stiffly among Alexander's officers, their postures rigid with suppressed resentment. Alexander, flushed with victory and the heat of the crowded space, observed it all with a conqueror's weary satisfaction. His gaze swept over the subdued assembly until it settled on her. She stood apart not in distance but in demeanor. Where others looked down or aside, she met the world with a level, unyielding gaze. Roxana, daughter of Oxyartes, a Bactrian lord who had chosen pragmatism over pride. Her beauty was undeniable: dark eyes, finely sculpted features, hair like polished ebony, but it was her composure that held him. Here was no broken spirit. He approached her. The room seemed to still slightly, officers and locals alike watching the exchange. She did not curtsy or lower her eyes, though she inclined her head in a gesture of courtesy that stopped short of submission. "You do not seem to share in your people's sorrow," Alexander remarked, his tone carefully neutral. Roxana's reply was soft, yet carried. "Sorrow does not require a public performance, Lord. My people are conquered, not extinguished. We remember who we are, even in silence." Her words were measured, intelligent. There was defiance there, but it was cloaked in dignity, a resistance of the spirit, not the sword. Intrigued, he asked about her land, its customs, its strengths. She answered with clarity, neither embellishing nor diminishing, her insights revealing a sharp mind behind the serene face. Alexander felt the stirrings of more than attraction. Here was a key not just to pacify Bactria, but to bind it. A woman who could stand as his equal in wit and will, a symbol of unity rather than subjugation. The idea took root swiftly, strategic and personal intertwined. He looked at her and saw not merely a beautiful captive, but a partner for the empire he meant to build. The command tent was a place of hardened leather and the smell of old weapons, a stark contrast to the scented halls of Bactrian nobility. Here, Alexander's generals stood in a tense semicircle, their faces carved from the same grim stone as the northern mountains they had so recently subdued. When Alexander announced his intention to marry Roxana, the silence that followed was heavier than any battle din. Craterus was the first to break it, his voice a low growl. "A Bactrian woman, you would mix our blood with that of the people we spent a season bleeding to break. This is not the way of Macedon." Ptolemy, ever the pragmatist, added more quietly, "The men will see it as a betrayal. They fought to conquer the East, not to wed it. Loyalty is a fragile thing, Alexander. This risks fracturing it." Alexander's expression did not waver. He stood before them not as a companion in arms, but as a king envisioning an empire that stretched beyond their understanding. "We did not cross the world merely to plunder it and leave ruins in our wake," he countered, his voice calm yet ironclad. "An empire built only on the sword is destined to fall by it. I have adopted Persian dress, welcomed their nobles into our administration. This is but the next step. A union with a daughter of Bactria signals that we are here to build, not just to break. It will bind this land to us more surely than any garrison." He spoke of his vision, a fusion of peoples, where Greek thought and Eastern tradition could create something stronger than either alone. He reminded them of the Persian nobles who now rode beside them, of the hybrid customs already taking root in his court. This marriage was not an impulse, it was policy. Grudgingly, preparations began. Alexander dictated the terms himself, a ceremony that would weave Macedonian and Bactrian traditions into a single tapestry. Greek vows would be spoken, but a Bactrian priest would bless the union. They would break bread according to Macedonian custom, but share wine from a Bactrian ceremonial cup. The very architecture of the ritual was designed to be a declaration, a new world order, forged in this remote fortress. Outside the tent, Roxana was not consulted. Her perspective remained confined to the women's quarters, a silent figure around whom great events now turned, her future being decided by men whose language she did not yet speak, in a tent she had never entered. The wedding ceremony unfolded in the central courtyard of the fortress, a space that seemed to hold its breath between two worlds. On one side, Alexander's Macedonian companions stood in stern formation, their polished armor in crimson cloaks a stark contrast to the vibrant, intricate silks of the Bactrian nobles on the other. The air itself felt divided, carrying the scent of olive oil and metal from the Greeks and saffron and sandalwood from the east. Alexander wore the ceremonial garb of a Macedonian king, but over it he had draped a Bactrian robe of deep blue, embroidered with gold thread. Roxana was resplendent in a gown that fused elements of both cultures, the structured elegance of a Greek peplos, but woven with Bactrian patterns and adorned with amber and lapis lazuli. Her veil was translucent, allowing her features to remain visible, a concession to Macedonian custom, yet its edges were fringed with tiny bells, a Bactrian tradition to ward off ill spirits. The rituals began with a Macedonian herald proclaiming the union in Greek, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Then a Bactrian elder stepped forward, chanting blessings in a tongue few of Alexander's men understood, his hands moving in slow, symbolic gestures over the couple. Alexander and Roxana knelt together on a carpet woven with motifs from both lands, lions of Macedon alongside Bactrian snow leopards. They drank from a single cup, a deep silver vessel of Macedonian make, but filled with wine mixed with honey and spices in the Bactrian manner. Alexander drank first, then offered it to Roxana. Her hands did not tremble as she accepted it, her eyes meeting his over the rim. In that moment, the act was more than symbolic. It was a shared burden, a mingling of futures. The reactions among the attendees were as varied as their dress. The older generals, Craterus, Perdiccas, stood with arms crossed, their faces set in grim lines. They saw not unity, but dilution, not strength, but vulnerability. Younger officers, however, watched with open curiosity, some even nodding faintly at the elegance of the blended rites. Among the Bactrians there was cautious hope. For them, Roxana was not a token of submission but a bridge, a chance for preservation within conquest. When the vows were complete, and Alexander placed a Macedonian diadem beside a Bactrian circlet upon Roxana's brow, the courtyard remained silent for a heartbeat too long. Then at Alexander's signal, both Macedonian trumpets and Bactrian drums sounded, a dissonant yet powerful fanfare that seemed to shake the very stones. Roxana rose beside her husband, her expression serene but her mind acutely aware of the delicate balance she now embodied. She was queen, but of a contested realm, beloved by one, mistrusted by many. In the stillness behind her eyes, resolve took root. She would survive this, and she would ensure that her people did too. The march into India was a trial of flesh and spirit. The world narrowed to dust-choked roads, the groaning of ox carts, and the relentless sun that baked the earth into cracked tiles. Roxana traveled in a covered carriage, but its curtains did little to keep out the grit or the stifling heat. Each jolt over rough terrain was a fresh ache in her bones. She learned to move with the rhythm of the army, her body growing leaner, harder, her hands no longer those of a sheltered noblewoman, but marked by travel and adaptation. She did not complain. Instead, she observed, her dark eyes missing nothing, the way the local guides avoided certain paths, the subtle shifts in the vegetation that hinted at water sources, the uneasy tension in the Macedonian ranks as they pushed deeper into unknown lands. Alexander, in his rare moments of respite, began to seek her not only for comfort, but for counsel. He would come to her tent smelling of leather and sweat, his brow furrowed with the strain of command, and ask her of the customs of the hill tribes they encountered or the significance of a local shrine. "They will not fight openly here," she told him once, her voice low as she prepared a cup of wine diluted with the scarce, precious water. "They will use the land itself, the narrow passes, the sudden floods. They will fade into the forests you cannot penetrate. You must offer them honor, not just threat." He listened, his gaze thoughtful. In these moments, the conqueror was just a man, weary and burdened, and she saw the weight of the world upon his shoulders. Sometimes he would reach for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin, and there would be a tenderness between them that felt stolen from the chaos, a quiet space amid the clamor of camp and the specter of battle. But these intimacies were fleeting. Always the suspicious glances of the Macedonian old guard followed her. At staff meetings, she felt the cold eyes of men like Craterus and Meleager upon her, their distrust a palpable force. They murmured among themselves when she passed, their Greek sharp and dismissive. To them she remained the barbarian queen, a dangerous influence who whispered Eastern secrets in their king's ear, softening his Macedonian resolve. Yet she endured. She learned to dress wounds when the surgeons were overwhelmed, to distribute food fairly among the camp followers, to offer a word of calm in a dozen different dialects. She became a fixed point in the swirling chaos of the campaign, a symbol of Alexander's fused empire, respected by the foreign contingents and even by some of the more pragmatic officers, but never fully accepted. Her resilience was not invulnerability, it was a choice, made every morning when she rose to face the dust and the distance and the silent, judging eyes determined to survive not just for herself, but for the future Alexander saw when he looked at her. The air in Babylon was thick with the smell of incense and decay. Alexander's body lay in state, a husk of the force that had once shaken the world, and the empire he built began to crack like sun-baked clay. In the hushed, anxious corridors of power, Roxana moved like a ghost, a foreign queen in a city of strangers, her belly swelling with the only legacy that still held meaning. She was utterly alone. Her Bactrian kin were distant, powerless. The Macedonian generals, Perdiccas, Ptolemy, Antipater, circled like vultures, their loyalty not to Alexander's dream but to their own ambition. They spoke in hurried Greek she strained to understand, their eyes sliding over her as though she were part of the furniture. She was carrying the king's child, and that made her both precious and perilous. Perdiccas approached her with the air of a man proposing a business arrangement, which in truth he was. He found her in her chambers, seated with a stillness that belied the storm within. "The child must be recognized," he said, his tone clipped and practical. "A son of Alexander cannot be ignored, but legitimacy alone is not a shield. You will need protection. I can provide it." Roxana studied him. She saw no kindness in his eyes, only calculation. He did not support her out of loyalty to Alexander's memory. He supported her because a pregnant queen and an unborn heir were tools, a claim to legitimacy he could wield against his rivals. She understood this. Survival had sharpened her mind. "And what do you require in return?" she asked, her voice steady though her hands trembled faintly in her lap. "Your public endorsement. When the time comes, the army will swear allegiance to the child, Alexander's son, with me as his guardian. Your role is to be the grieving, faithful widow, the symbol." She nodded slowly, her mind racing. She was using him as much as he was using her. Her pregnancy was her only power, a shield against those who might otherwise dispose of her quietly, and a weapon to ensure her child's place was recognized. She agreed to the alliance, each word measured, each promise double-edged. In the weeks that followed, she played her part flawlessly. She appeared in mourning veils, pale and solemn, the picture of tragic devotion. In private, she listened at doors, learned names, mapped the shifting allegiances of the men who would decide her fate and her son's. She knew Perdiccas' support was conditional, contingent on his own power lasting. When her pains began, she labored in guarded silence, attended only by a midwife she barely trusted. The child, when he came, was a boy small but alive. She named him Alexander, binding him irrevocably to his father. As she held him, she felt not joy, but a ferocious, terrifying love. He was all she had left. The empire was fracturing into armed camps, the Diadochi already sharpening their swords. But in a dim room in Babylon, Roxana looked down at her son's face and made a silent vow. She would protect him. She would use every weapon she had, cunning, patience, the very blood in his veins, to secure his throne. It was a fragile hope, poised on the edge of a knife, but it was all she had.